Hello, good morning and welcome. It's Thursday, March the 27th. My name's Sam Coates of Sky News.
And I'm Anne McElvoy from Politico. Welcome to Politics at Sam and Anne's, the podcast that gives you everything you need to know about British politics in 20 minutes. And the big story of the spring statement and what it portends has been moving incredibly quickly over the last day, overnight and into today. And Sam, I can barely get rid of you on my television screen.
I'm sorry, I'll leave you alone for a few days after today. I'm not going to lie, it's been a lot of hours in the studio. You know, each one is a total privilege and absolutely fascinating. I spent yesterday in the Sky studio in Millbank, and you watch these things, these big political events unfold in real time, sitting next to the brilliant Sophie Ridge and Ed Conway, our economics editor. And there's a sort of real sense after the statement of the key bits being digested, analysed, and the implications of it all as the MPs and business leaders and charities troop in and out to be interviewed by Sophie and us all. And as we get into it, there are going to be two big consequences of yesterday, I think, that we talk about. One is whether or not Rachel Reeves has really solved the problems that she had, or whether or not she's ended up in a doom loop where we're going to be looking for more savings or maybe tax hikes in a few months' time because she ended up creating exactly the same situation that she created in the budget. And then the other consequential area, I think, from yesterday is the political fallout from welfare cuts, more details about which we got yesterday, including that extraordinary impact assessment. If I had to highlight one moment that sort of captured things, it was in the studio and the sort of left-wing Labour MP, Clive Lewis, who you wouldn't expect to be a fan of what's going on at the moment and the economic direction of the government, was talking, he wants a change. He wants to change the direction. No doubt about that, and he was very upfront about that. But I said, can this chancellor deliver that change of direction, or might you need to have a new one? And there was just an incredibly long silence in the studio, just a sort of crackly silence that you know, and then eventually he sort of gave a politician's fudgy answer, which walked the tightrope. But whilst in the short term, I think the disability rebellion has sort of deepened, but not necessarily widened. I do think that the politics around Rachel Reeves may have shifted a bit from all of the conversations I had, not in her favour. But we'll come on to the nuances around that in a moment. And tell us, you've heard about mine. Tell us, what was your spring statement experience? How did you experience the last 24 hours?
Yes, it was an extraordinary moment. I happened to catch it on social media. It was this viral moment, and you could see that discomfort. And it reminded me of someone giving a very lukewarm endorsement of a prime minister in the past, saying he's the best prime minister we've got, begrudgingly. And then I couldn't remember who said that. And neither of us have been quick enough this morning with everything else going on to Google it. So we're going to let our listeners let us know who said in a kind of way, he's the best prime minister we've got. Poor Rachel Reeves, the best chancellor we've got, one way and the other. She really had, I think, a mountain to climb yesterday. And it struck me coming back into the country from Germany this week with Germany's parliament reconvening, like the incoming chancellor is under huge pressure in his centre-right party because he is borrowing to spend so much, Sam, on defence, and also then having to give sweeteners to his coalition partners and spend a lot domestically. Absolutely furious Conservative CDU people saying this is not what we think our party is for. And I walk back into Britain where the party of the centre left, reeling from the Chancellor's fiscal tightening, saying this is not what I think it is to be Labour. So the centre ground is a very changeable place these days. And in the background are those challenges, those headwinds that are coming one way and another from the fallout from Russia's aggression in Ukraine and threat beyond. And from the US administration, Rachel Reeves really still having to look possibly towards tax rises, which she absolutely prefers not to do, or to cut spending again if President Trump does follow through on his threat to impose tariffs on car imports to the US next week. And that would be really a blow to Britain. A lot of our business with the US is in that sector.
That's right. And I think that's the starting point for this morning's analysis of the spring statement, because in politics, you make your own luck. And sometimes it's the reverse. And serendipity felt to me like it was at work last night. Because really two stories collided yesterday and overnight. And I don't think it's overstating it to say that we had Donald Trump effectively marking Rachel Reeves' homework in a funny kind of way. And he undermined her on his big day. And let me explain why, because if you put the right bits together, it's absolutely stark. To rewind, the budget in October, Rachel Reeves sets very tough borrowing rules, but then spends a lot of money and doesn't leave herself a lot of margin for error, so that she doesn't break her fiscal rules. That's the £9.9 billion of headroom that you hear talked about. Yesterday, the big thing was that her own spending and economic watchdog said she broke that. She faced a downgrade to the tune of £14 billion because the economy was worse off than she thought it would be. And that put her on track to break her fiscal rules. So she had to take emergency action and find £14 billion of savings. Very, very painful. And she did that by squeezing spending in Whitehall in future years, right down to exactly the same levels that Jeremy Hunt, the former Tory chancellor, had penciled in. She found some tax evasion money, our old friend. There were groans in the studio and snorts as we heard that, because they don't always generate the cash that we're told. And then there was the very, very painful welfare cuts that we will talk about in a moment. So she then sucked up real pain in order to restore her headroom, her margin for error, back to exactly the same amount, £9.9 billion. But the moment she finished, all of the economic establishment came out. The Office of Budget Responsibility, the Institute for Fiscal Studies, the Resolution Foundation, all of them made the obvious point, which was you didn't leave enough headroom in the budget in October and it got wiped out, but you've only given yourself exactly the same amount of headroom. And by the way, it's to the second decimal point. She's given herself £9.93 billion, which is, I mean, curiously, she must have spent a long time getting it to this level of accuracy. It was 9.93 billion in October. And the second she sat down, the Office for Budget Responsibility plastered a warning on its homepage. And in the kind of economic ease, it says, that sum remains a small margin against the risks of further shocks to interest rates, productivity, or global trade. Right. Global trade. The trade war. The OBR was warning that a trade war could wipe out her headroom. And what happened 6 hours later? At 6 hours later? Well, Donald Trump escalated the trade war. He signed a proclamation to implement a 25% tariff on car imports to the US. Half of all our trade to the US, just under half, is in cars. It's a £6 billion market, and there's a 25% tariff on those cars from next week. Now, I would venture the danger is now Rachel Reeves, as Donald Trump illustrated overnight, repeated the risks she took in the autumn, leaving herself a too small buffer. And right now, global events mean that risks being wiped out even faster because the global risks are even bigger. So are we stuck in a doom loop, Anne?
It's being so cheerful as keeps you going, Sam Coates. Well, it doesn't feel happy days are here again, right? But it does feel like Rachel Reeves is stuck in a kind of loop. I know people keep saying it's of her own making because it all happened when she set herself into this very tight stricture on spending and borrowing in opposition to show the discipline of the Labour Party. I think it's interesting maybe she's in one of those moods when everything is just so difficult and negative that she decided to go out there a bit on the front foot. I would put in a word for Rachel Reeves's performance yesterday. We shouldn't forget that it was in essence a mini budget. It was quite a big mini budget. And I thought she carried it off with a degree of aplomb. I mean, she didn't sound as rattled as many professional politicians with a lot more experience might have found that very, very difficult to deliver. That recipe of pain there that you laid out, sucking it up as you put it, that's really the mood the paper papers today for, oh, terrible for her, either on the left, benefit snatcher, on the right, or even somewhere in the mushy middle, oh, we're all going to have to pay more taxes, and it still hasn't worked kind of a feeling. But, now we all speak fluent Politico. But I was talking to a former number 10 insider last night who'd been through a lot of these, and they made a few interesting points on how it could still just about maybe go okay for Labour. And that narrative was that you've got the big cuts coming on welfare dependency, and that you're cutting off some of the right-wing attack on that, either from the Tories or Reform. I mean, it's pretty hard to say, oh, you should be going further when you really are taking things right down to the bone there on welfare and sickness disabilities. So you have shown an absolute seriousness about that. And at the same time, on those figures that we saw yesterday, Sam, and you were across them in every moment, to the second decimal point, as you've modestly reminded us. But those figures do show things getting minorly better, and a trend of that, or even according to the rather grumpy OBR on this, in the years ahead. So you could see a narrative for Labour that says we came in, we inherited a mess, it's all been terrible, the world was against us, but with us things are going upwards. And are you really going to don't throw it all away, as I think Rishi Sunak said, though that may not be my best example. But it was just interesting that there is still a view that Reeves could walk what this person called a very narrow corridor to a more upbeat story, and that's what Labour needs. Just a little detail as well, at my Politico colleagues this morning have a piece on the relationship with Keir Starmer and what effect this is all having there, and reporting that PM is trying to hire a senior economics advisor, possibly a sign that Number 10 wants its own stronger grip, or at least someone to interpret directly back to the PM policy making on the economy, and perhaps also on that difficulty of tax, spend, borrow, or what constellation. That does, of course, cast me back, because I'm been around for a bit, to Tony Blair bringing Derek Scott, the late Derek Scott, in to Number 10 to balance out the influence of Gordon Brown, and all that ended up with was more turf wars.
Yes, we've been around the sort of circuit of whether or not Keir Starmer is going to hire an economic advisor a few times. There were rumours that Rachel Reeves wasn't keen. Rachel Reeves absolutely denies that, as does her team. But it never transpired. I suspect in part what happened was they never really found somebody who felt like a good fit. But the consequence is that Number 10 has largely, it feels, subcontracted a lot of economic decisions to the Treasury. Looking at that slightly more optimistic case, that the thing that I think Rachel Reeves pointed to yesterday, probably a bit too much, but because the sums involved are only smaller, but the Office of Budget Responsibility did score as a bit of a win the changes that this government have done with the planning bill, which I still think is one of the most important things that this government has done. And they did upgrade growth only by 0.4% in future years, but nevertheless, they did upgrade growth off the back of that. And that's the thing that some in the Labour Party think could provide a sort of an up-ramp. That the difficulty is, for all of the flourish and for all that she made of that, it is only a very small percentage that of difference that makes. So I think they've got to do a hell of a lot more unblocking the blockers, and whether or not Keir Starmer's rhetoric on that matches the reality, I think is a very interesting question. We need to talk a bit about the welfare changes, because alongside the statement that Rachel Reeves gave and the assessment by the Office for Budget Responsibility, dropped this other document spelling out in full the welfare changes. And that's the thing that's driving the politics today, because it revealed the scale of the changes to welfare and the cost that people are going to have to bear. So I'm looking at the document right now. And honestly, Anne, the drop in income that some people who claim disability benefits or would have claimed disability benefits is eye-watering, and more than the drop that people have been able to get through before. So changes to the personal independence entitlement, which helps you. It's not an in-work benefit. It helps you alongside your work, will mean 370,000 current recipients and 430,000 future recipients of PIP lose an average of £4,500 a year. That is just such a big figure for anybody to swallow. Yes, there are gainers in other ways, but the people who notice the people that lose out. The impact assessment says 250,000 people, including 50,000 children, will be pushed into relative poverty after housing costs by the end of the decade. That's a government document from a Labour government saying 50,000 more children will be in poverty, which I think was a bit of a punch in the gut to lots of Labour MPs. I remember when Gordon Brown was trying to eradicate child poverty, and this Keir Starmer government has increasing child poverty on an impact assessment that the Department for Work and Pensions has released. That is very painful. One little nuance on the politics, Anne, it was fascinating to watch that this was a DWP document that was effectively being rubbished by Treasury ministers who were out on broadcast. They were like, yeah, the 250,000 people being pushed into poverty, but lots of them will get into work, and the document doesn't really make that very, very clear. No, this is your government document, and it wouldn't have said the 250,000 figure in that way unless it believed it. And for all the spin, it's there in black and white. I think this is another sign of the tensions between DWP and Treasury, and somebody involved in all of that really wasn't denying that when I put it to them yesterday. But Labour MPs are unhappy. I'm not sure it's broadened the rebellion, but those that are unhappy are much, much, much more unhappy than they were yesterday.
Really interesting, and certainly in communications on that, as you point out, the fact that you had something to go up after there in terms of the tonal differences, but between DWP and Treasury ministers. But the facts are the facts, and they're there in a government document. And if the government starts to divide against itself, starting with the pressures of that big welfare cut and the impacts there, which as you point out, for a party, many of whom believe that those years under Gordon Brown, that very focused attempt to bring down relative poverty across the population, and particularly for families, and particularly when it affects children, it really is a big moment, a big kind of moral moment for the party to tussle with. It's also the briefing hosted by Darren Jones. We were talking about the pain of Rachel Reeves, by the way. Can we just say Darren Jones? He seems to be the Treasury minister, of course, close to Rachel Reeves, who's out there all the time. He really does get the jobs that no one would want, trying to go out and defend that. And he was very spicy in his statement, quite testy, saying at one point in a briefing with the MPs, if you don't support these changes, it indicates you'd be more comfortable in opposition, he is quoted as saying. Now, that is quite a big blunderbuss to have to roll out the day after a chancellor's major event, isn't it? You usually keep that one for when all else fails and you're fighting in the trenches. But that sense that, hang on a minute, if you go too far down this road, we could find ourselves, self-criticism, falling out with ourselves. We've been down this before. But to have to say that on the back of the figure that you pointed out is, to me, an indication that this is very, very serious indeed within the party.
Yeah, I was told about that as well. One of the MPs in the room said that the tone of the room suggests a sizable rebellion. And Darren Jones saying, if you don't support these changes, it indicates you'd be more comfortable in opposition. They said, I'm not sure that'll have done much to calm people down. As I keep saying, I don't think the disability rebellion will mean that this legislation needed to pass these changes will not pass. It's not clear to me that there is going to be a significant, given the majority there's a majority of 160, a significant threat to this legislation going through. However, I do think that there's a political consequence from yesterday, which is, I think, talking to MPs across the spectrum on the Labour side, I do think there's a danger that Rachel Reeves' kind of impregnable reputation in the Labour Party has been damaged by yesterday. Now, for some MPs, that was because of the mess around the way that they've been doing things, the fact that they've ended up coming for universal credit, the basic level, just so that she can fill in her fiscal rules. For others, it's the fact that they've had to go for disability benefit. Just if I could read a couple of reactions from Labour MPs. one of them who's on the left went, it's immoral. What's the point of the Labour Party? I'm voting against it. So that's the sort of left. And some of them, like Clive Lewis, were very upfront that they're going to vote against it. It's the moderate ones, the sort of new moderate ones, I think, that are the really worrying ones for this government. One of those said, what on earth are we doing cutting the basic rate of universal credit to meet our fiscal rules? It's embarrassment. And it's embarrassing. The PLP, the Parliamentary Labour Party, are close to losing it. The grumbling has moved beyond the usual suspects. The sense of political grip of the centre is being actively questioned by sort of loyalist MPs, just as it started to be in cabinet. That is a danger for Rachel Reeves. I think that the window around her reputation might have shifted yesterday, and there are lots and lots of flashpoints ahead, including the spending review, including global headwinds that get worse, including all sorts of tax and spend difficulties. And so, although you might not know where this is going to lead, I think things are going to get more difficult.
And that puts her in the position to the teasing question we asked, who said is the best chancellor, prime minister, where we've got in that way when you really don't want to endorse someone. And what's the alternative then? Who would Keir Starmer put in? Who would do what? And I think Rachel Reeves, it's never a nice position to be in, isn't it? When the reason that you're seen as being glued into the job is that they can't think of anyone else who would do something else. But I agree with that. I think this is a major moment, and I think there is a lot of tension around this. Rachel Reeves will just be hoping she can get those welfare changes to move through quickly and show some benefits from that.
Anne, you are the best podcast co-host I have got. And on that note, we're going to have to wrap it up. It's been lovely speaking to you this week. We will be back on Monday morning with Politics at Sam and Anne's. Have a lovely weekend.
I really deserve that. Have a great weekend. Get some sleep, Sam. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Donald Trump is heading back to the White House.
Together we can truly make America great again.
We are in for an unpredictable but fascinating 4 years.
And we're going to be following every twist and turn for the first 100 days. We'll be bringing you the latest updates and analysis first thing every morning. So join me, James Matthews.
Me, Martha Kalnick.
And me, Mark Stone.
For Trump 100 every weekday at 6 a.m, wherever you get your podcasts.